Hello everyone and welcome to yet another interview on the NARSA podcast. I'm Gary Gillan and I'm your host for today, and I'm very, very happy to be joined by former Rangers director and interim chairman Mr. Paul Murray. Paul has enjoyed many highs, lows and highs again with our great club, and now gets to enjoy the current on-field success as a regular fan like the rest of us. I'm not sure if that regular word is absolutely correct or not, but anyway, Paul, thank you very much for joining NARSA today. How are you doing? And since I've been asking everyone on the interviews of late, how has COVID been affecting your life this past almost year?
Yeah, hi Gary, nice to speak to you again. Yeah, it's been an interesting time, obviously for everyone. So I actually, believe it or not, I moved to the Algarve in Portugal in December 2019. So I've been here for about 14, 15 months now, and obviously the master plan is to come back 1 week every month to do business and sort of see friends and family. Obviously, I didn't legislate for COVID-19, which has made things pretty tricky on the travel front. So it's been quite a frustrating year. It's been a great move from my personal point of view, and obviously the climate's lovely and all the rest of it. But obviously, not being able to see friends and family and indeed see the football has obviously been one of the downsides.
Yeah, it sounds like you planned that one pretty poorly there, Paul. I'm quite disappointed.
Yeah, it wasn't my greatest travel decision. But in fairness, I don't think many people could foresee a pandemic in December 2019.
No, it's certainly been incredible. So let's get into the meat of the discussion here. So if you could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your history as a Rangers fan, your career, and how your career manifested itself into becoming a director of Rangers Football Club back in 2007. How does one become a director of an institution?
Sure. Well, let me start a little bit with some personal stuff. So born in Paisley, like yourself, Paisley buddy, and my father's family were all massive Rangers fans. His brothers and his father, my grandfather, big Rangers fans. But my father was a big St Mirren fan. I think he kind of rebelled a little bit against his father. So when I was growing up in the sort of 70s, when I began to watch football properly, we would, and in those days, there was only two divisions. You might remember, I think the Premier League came into being in about 1975, 76. So up until that point, there was two leagues, the first division and the second division. And invariably, St Mirren were always in the second division. So what we do is, we must have planned it this way to maximise crowds. So what we do is we go to Love Street one Saturday, then go to Ibrox the next Saturday, so you can see a second division match and a first division match. And actually, my first ever Rangers game was so in 1972, when obviously the year of Barcelona, St Mirren drew Rangers. I think it was the fourth round of the Scottish Cup at Love Street. And up until that point, I'd been to St Mirren versus Clydebank or Dumbarton. There'd be like literally 1,000 people there or something like this. And then suddenly Rangers come to town, and there's 29,000 people in Love Street. I was 8 at the time, and I remember being absolutely fascinated. Who are these people? Suddenly there's massive crowd, massive game. The Rangers won 4-1 actually, and that was really when my first interest got into Rangers. I thought, this is an incredible club. 29, the stadium. I remember sort of obviously being I think my father's shoulders at one point. It was just so packed, the crowd. There's the days of the sort of terracing when it was absolutely cram full, and it was just an incredible spectacle. So that was my first real kind of recognition of Rangers at that point.
Nice. And then on to so how does that then manifest itself into a journey that takes you from the stands at Love Street and your first experience of Rangers to the boardroom?
Yeah, well, I mean, my career has been in primarily in what's called private equity, which is investing in private companies. So I qualified as a chartered accountant in the late 80s, and I pretty much moved straight from accountancy, because it's so exciting, obviously, straight into investment. So I joined the private equity industry in 1989. So I've been doing that for about 30 odd years. And through that sort of career, I got to know David Murray quite well, just through business. And so when Rangers, going back to about 2004, the club was needing to raise funding and trying to kind of raise funds from different sources. I invested into a thing we set up called Rangers Youth Development, which was set up to effectively try and fund the youth academy at what's now Auchenhowie, to try and bring young players through. There was four of us initially, and another guy joined. There was 5 in total. Sort of private investors put some money in on a completely no gain basis to try and help fund the cost of the youth academy. So I first got involved in the club, in terms of the insides, that sanctum, if you like, in 2004. And obviously that I got into the kind of inner workings of the club a little bit at that point in time. I got to know Martin Bain pretty well, and Martin and I struck up quite a friendship over the next couple of years. And then I think Martin was quite keen. At that time, Martin becomes CEO, and he was quite keen, I think, to refresh the board and bring in some sort of fresh blood. So he recommended to David that they appoint me. So I was appointed in September 2007.
And was that an ambition of yours to get into the boardroom, or was it just a series of circumstances that presented themselves and then you thought, why not?
It wasn't really ambition, I don't think. I mean, obviously I'm a football fan and a Rangers fan, and I think every football fan is fascinated by their own club, and but I never really had any ambitions to be, you obviously read all the stories about football clubs and how difficult they are, and all this kind of stuff. And but I suppose when I got involved in 2004, I kind of saw the club from the inside, for the first time, because obviously I was going to Auchenhowie quite a bit, obviously with the Rangers Youth Development, and we actually formed a board. So the board of Rangers Youth Development was a kind of 5 investors that put the money up. Martin was the CEO. We had John Gregg and Sandy Jardine were on the board as well. And then I think there was one other guy, I can't remember who it was. But, so it was really interesting to be with. I mean, John and Sandy were my heroes, especially John Gregg, was my hero. So to be in the same kind of room as those guys, and, just to listen to how they spoke and talked about football, and it was a really fascinating time. And so I suppose, and then of course, because I was involved there, I would go to most of the games in the director's box, so you get a bit closer to the kind of inner workings of the club. So yeah, I suppose it was from 2004 to 2007, I just gradually increased my involvement. And as I say, then, I think Martin was quite keen personally to bring in some fresh faces, and I guess that's what led to the appointment in 2007.
Yeah, and to that, what did it mean to be a director in those days? Is there, and forgive my ignorance, but is there such a thing as a job description? There's a specific portfolio or a specific function that you're there to represent? How was that structure laid out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's, as you know, there's not a great legal distinction, but there's what's called, obviously, executive directors like Martin and the finance director who are doing day-to-day work at the club and obviously getting paid. And then there's non-executive directors who are providing more of a sort of independent oversight and kind of input and on obviously a totally part-time basis. So I was a non-executive part-time director, totally unpaid. I suppose what they saw, but given my investment career and experience, they probably saw maybe I could help them with raising funding and funding projects and that kind of stuff. So I think there was no official portfolio as such, but I guess that was probably the thinking behind, because obviously with any board you want to have a balance of different skills, and I suppose those skills didn't really exist on the board at that point in time.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I find stuff like that so intriguing, just in terms of honestly how structured they are or not, or how formal or informal they become to end up coming to fruition as to what the end result is going to be. So that's great. So then that as we didn't know at the time, I'm sure you didn't know at the time, that would be your first tenure with the club, and there would be a break at some point. But when you come in, Celtic win a couple of titles in your first couple of years, and
no, they won one title, because I came in the September of 2007. So.
Okay, right. Okay, my bad. Sorry about that. And then Walter drives us, almost immediately after that to the three titles in a row, which were, as we didn't know at the time, titles number 52, 53, and 54. Before he left the manager's role again, leaving Alistair McCoist to take over. You were also there, I guess that would be quite early in your formal tenure, for the run to Manchester. And at one point in that season, it looked like there was a historic quadruple on the cards, and it didn't work out quite to be that. And we fell at the final hurdle in both the league and the UEFA Cup final. What was it like? The club, it must have been fever pitch in the club at that time, just in terms of excitement, in terms of stakeholders to manage, our organisation to up the yin yang for everything that was going on in and around the club. How was it? How were you able to manage the football side on all fronts? I know you weren't responsible directly for managing the football side, but that would have to be a part of your day-to-day conversations, I would imagine, in terms of your board responsibilities. How did we manage to keep the club going in the right direction at that time, with all of that stuff going on all of those fronts?
Well, remember, that was my very first year, so I'm thinking, this is incredible. I joined the board, and literally my first game as a director was in Lyon. We beat Lyon 3-0. Probably one of our best ever European. Lee McCulloch scored, and Darshawal and Daniel Kuzan. It was just sensational stuff. Lyon were a top Champions League team, and we absolutely battered them. So that's my first game. So I'm thinking, this is brilliant. And of course, with a great Champions League, we drew Barcelona and Stuttgart as well as Lyon. And we were actually really unlucky, I thought, in that campaign. A couple of just results went against us, and we started really well, and then ran out of a bit of steam, unfortunately. So we then obviously dropped to third place, which was important, and then into the UEFA Cup. And when it first started in Panathinaikos in Athens, we never thought we would go anywhere. And obviously Nacho scored the goal in the last 10 minutes, and then off and running. And it's a great experience. So I'm thinking, this is what's going to happen every season. This is great. It was really exciting, and I think it might even still be, but it was certainly at the time the biggest turnover revenue the club ever had, because obviously all the commercial, you just couldn't obviously surpass that, given the number of games. Obviously all the European revenue, the Champions League run, UEFA Cup run. It was just an incredible year. I think it was about 70 million of revenue, even that's going back 13 years or so. So it was obviously a great time to be involved in the club. Obviously, it was really, really unfortunate the last week. I remember I went to all the games. We played, in Manchester on the Wednesday. Unfortunately, lost the game. Went to Motherwell on the Saturday. Obviously pretty jaded. Drew one each, and that was the first real issue we had. Then went to Love Street on the Monday. We had to play about 5 games in a week, and then went to Aberdeen on the Thursday. Obviously lost the league, unfortunately, last game of the season, and then played Queen of the South on the Saturday in the Scottish Cup final. So it was an incredible run. I suppose the way I look at that run is, obviously people with different views as to why it ended up that way, but it was hugely exciting. To be involved. It was a great team as well. We played some great football, and I really think if it hadn't been for the distractions of the UEFA Cup, we would have won the league that year, no question. But it was great to be involved in the European final. You can say that that's important in the club's status and prestige. I think ultimately it was just too many games caught up with us, but it was still really exciting to obviously be part of that. I certainly personally wouldn't change that experience. Looking back.
In the aftermath of the season, was the atmosphere one of disappointment, one of some sort of contentment, with some immediate reflection on what was actually achieved in the 60 plus games that we had played that season? What was it like in the summer?
I think it was I think there was disappointment, obviously. I mean, I guess it's the old Bill Shankly thing, isn't it? You know, the league's your bread and butter. You want to win the league every year, and disappointment you hadn't won the league. I think there's a lot of pride we'd got to the UEFA Cup final, which was a great achievement for the club. It's only, you know, the club's second or third European appearance. So that was obviously a great source of pride. You know, I think the attention then quickly moved on to, well, there's obviously qualifiers coming up for the Champions League, and the players had played so many games, and there was I do remember Walter saying he was concerned about, you know, fatigue and the fact they'd only had a few weeks off, and then were straight back into the qualifiers, and of course we then lost the game in Kaunas, which was, you know, a huge disappointment, obviously. So it was a kind of double-edged sword, wasn't it? It was a great campaign, but I think it certainly had implications for the following season. I think, well, certainly at the start of the season, given the fatigue the players had.
Yeah. So during your early time on the back to the business side, David Murray is actively looking to sell the club at this time, which eventually happens with Craig White's purchase in May 2011. From a senior leadership perspective or vantage point within the club, how much did you experience of, you know, how things were running behind the scenes? How much visibility or involvement did you have in the search for a replacement? Was that something that was done at a board level in terms of, you know, as a team, or was it something that was being actively managed by David Murray on his own?
Yeah, very good question. I think the first thing to say is that I always look at my time on that particular board as being almost in two different segments. So I was there for 4 years roughly, and the first 2 years, 2007 to 2009, were very much still under the control of David Murray. He was the chairman. It was his club. You know, he was a 83%, 85% shareholder. He pretty much did what he wanted, and obviously we were the board, and he was respectful to the board, but it was his money, his club, etc. And then when I think what really happened, and when I look back, I think the club was really caught in a perfect storm, you know, because what happened in 2008, as everyone remembers, is the financial meltdown and banks obviously being in free fall, and I think David's businesses then come under real pressure, as a lot of businesses did, but David's obviously were in obviously real estate and assets like that. So, and he had a very close relationship with Bank of Scotland, which obviously got itself into huge problems and were taken over by Lloyds. And I think that was a perfect storm, because what happened there was that, you know, the combination of David losing his relationship with Bank of Scotland, which was a very close relationship and supportive, and then suddenly get Lloyds, who frankly they're thinking, you know, who are Rangers, who's David Murray, we're based in London. So that was an important change from a financing point of view. And then the second thing was David's own businesses were then under pressure as well. So he was then under financial pressure to obviously do things with his businesses. So when he stepped down as chairman, he still owned the club in 2009, and Alistair took over, Alistair Johnson as chairman. That was a completely different period. So Alistair, I thought, was a pretty effective chairman. So he, we kind of ran the club, I guess, a lot more as a kind of independent business. It was obviously still owned by the Murray Group. And I think I've said a number of times in different interviews over the years, you know, the model that we use, which, by the way, I think is still the right model certainly for most Scottish clubs, given the lack of, you know, real revenue from TV, is that we ran the club very much on a break-even basis based on domestic matches. So we would start the season, we'd say, right, we're going to have 38, league matches. We're going to have, let's say, a run in the Scottish Cup to, say, the quarterfinals, and you just make an assumption, and a run in the League Cup. Those are the games that we can see. So and we've got all the commercial revenues on top of that, which are pretty much predictable. So therefore, we know what our revenue is, and then let's just run the business in terms of the cost base and players, etc., to break even. And then your European revenue would be the bonus. So the European revenue would be Champions League, hopefully, but certainly the UEFA Cup in those days would become your investment fund. So you would use that to basically either invest in the infrastructure, the stadium, and/or players. And I think it's a really effective model, and we used that. And I think over the 2 years from 2009 to 11 when the bank were really pressurising us to reduce the debt. I think we halved the debt in that 2-year period, but still were very successful on the pitch. And it was basically adopting that model of being, being prudent in terms of the base plan, but then using the European money to effectively invest in the squad or the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then coming back to the question about what happened with the sale. So, it was quite clear when Lloyds took over that they wanted out. I wasn't directly involved in discussions with Lloyds because obviously they were, obviously looking at David's whole business empire in total, but it was quite clear they wanted out. You might remember they appointed a few people to the board themselves. And it was quite clear what their agenda was. So we had to work within those constraints. There was a couple of people came forward. So you might remember there's a guy called Andrew Ellis came forward with a potential proposal to buy the club, but he quickly kind of disappeared. And then the first I heard Craig White's name was we played Bursaspor in the Champions League game in Turkey in, I think, December 2010, for about 6 months before he eventually bought the club. And Alistair Johnson sort of got the board members together who were on that trip and basically said, look, this guy, Craig White, stepped forward. He's made a proposal to David. David's minded to take it forward, and of course we then started looking at, who's Craig White. And I'm sure we'll talk about him in a minute, but that was the first that I kind of heard of his name. In terms of any process, Dave King and I were always felt as if we had a kind of other interest in the club, so we were deliberately, which we accepted because we had a conflict. We weren't part of the independent committee that was set up by Alistair to try and manage the process on behalf of the board. So Dave and I weren't part of that, but Alistair led that pretty effectively actually, and was trying to make sure the club's interests were being looked after as best he could. Obviously it was difficult, but I think Alistair did a decent job in trying to do that.
Yeah. So then Craig comes in, takes over, Craig White, and then fairly promptly afterwards, you're removed from the board by Craig White after refusing to resign your position. Like, how was that all? How did that all come about? How was that communicated to you? So maybe the initial conversations that took place to say you're not part of our long-term future, and then the actual administration act of the removal. How did that all come about?
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting time. So I think the first thing to say is that when Alistair was running this independent committee, which didn't include Dave and I, which was fine, to try and, as I say, try and make sure the club's interests were being looked after as best we can, or at the very least to get visibility on what the deal was with Craig White. So we had the opportunity of meeting Craig White a couple of times. I was certainly part of that a couple of times, and I think I'm speaking for all the board. I think we all felt to a man it was a wrong decision to sell to Craig White. You could tell, I think we all just felt this isn't right, and so going into the sale when it eventually happened, we were all of us just obviously concerned about the future, and I think I said that publicly a lot of times before it in press interviews. And I was kind of seen, I guess, in some ways as a sort of, kind of anti-Craig White guy on the board. So Craig bought the club, I think it was the 6th of May. So it was the second last game of the season. We played Hearts at Ibrox, and then the following Sunday was the league title at Kilmarnock. So Craig bought the club on the Friday, and then he came to the match on the Saturday, and there's obviously that recording of him walking down Edmondson Drive with his family and friends and all that stuff. So as I say, the board had those concerns. I reached out to Dave King, obviously the week after he had bought the club, and I said, look, let's get together as a board on the morning of the Kilmarnock game. So we actually met at Ibrox as an early kickoff, obviously. We met in the morning as a board and just to kind of review where we were and what had happened in the week since obviously Craig had bought the club. And I said to Dave, I actually want to resign here because obviously I've got no desire or kind of wish to be part of Craig White's thing going forward. And Dave wanted me to stay on the board. He said, just stay on the board at the moment, and let's see what happens. So against my better judgment, I have to say, I stayed on the board. And then what happened, back to your question, which was, there's a really bizarre set of circumstances. So there was no real communication, although we're all still on the board. Obviously, Craig now owns the club, so it's a kind of strange, kind of interim transitional period. And there was no real communication from anyone, and obviously the season had ended, so there was no matches to go to and like that. So that's all fine, and we're kind of just waiting to see what happens. Yeah. I can't remember the exact date. It was something like May the 24th, so about 2 or 3 weeks after the Kilmarnock game. I'm in my house, and on a Sunday evening, about 10:30, just go to bed, and Craig White's lawyer was a guy called his surname actually. Anyway, his lawyer. Sorry, his name is Gary Whitty. Gary Whitty. So Gary Whitty, we basically get this email coming through to all the directors saying board meeting tomorrow at 12 o'clock. So this is the Sunday night at 10:30 p.m. board meeting call for midday the following day. Yeah. So that's a bit odd. And then I can open up the agenda, and there's just one item in the agenda that says number 1, the future. And that's it. That was the only item, the future. So I texted Martin Bain. I said, I think we know what's coming now, don't we? I mean, the future is not one that includes us. So anyway, so we got into this call. It's a conference call on the Monday. So this was the day of the board meeting. And it was kind of day, this is going back to 2011. Obviously, communications weren't, as good as they are now. And so there's this kind of rackety old conference call. It wasn't a video call, conference call. Yeah. And I was in Edinburgh in my house. Donald McIntyre and Martin Bain were at Ibrox with John Gregg, John McClelland, Craig White, and this guy Gary Whitty in a room. Yeah. Dave, for some reason, wasn't on the call. I don't know why he didn't make it. Alistair Johnson's in Cleveland at home, and Martin Bain was doing this charity thing with Coisty, Walter Smith, and Ian Durant in America. So he's calling in from New York, and it's outside some restaurant. There's all this background noise and taxis flying down Fifth Avenue and all this. Yeah. And so the board meeting starts, and Craig White's obviously very nervous. So he starts off, and he's kind of stuttering and stammering and all that. And eventually he tries to make a joke, and the joke fell flat, and he couldn't really hear what was going on. There was all this background noise. And then so his lawyer, Gary Whitty, steps in and starts reading from a sort of prepared legal statement. And the gist of it is that he wants Alistair and I to step down, which we say, we're not doing that. So he said, well, in that case, you're basically removed. And so fine, well, in that case, go on with it. And he then also effectively fires Martin and Donald for gross misconduct. And of course, because the line's so bad, people saying, sorry, what was that? Did you see gross misconduct? What was that? And it was all chaos. It was all this background noise. And so, but, at the end of it, basically, he had fired Martin and Donald, and he had removed Alistair and I. And I think the whole call lasted 5 minutes. So it was a pretty short and sharp exchange. And as I say, because it was made even more bizarre by just all the background noises and taxis, and it was really surreal actually.
It's almost fitting, to have all that background noise, a bizarre, nervous new chairman or owner, I should say, sorry, and a flat joke, and then and even, if you could say, an even bigger joke in terms of the way that the verdict was handed down. Incredible.
Yeah, no, it was, and then of course the following. I'm not even sure I even ever got an official communication. I don't think anyone even. It was just verbally said, and that was it. It was. I'm sure to this day there wasn't a kind of, a proper letter or termination. It was just done. So it didn't really bother me because I had, it was coming anyways, and obviously I didn't want to be part of the Craig White thing. So. But it was, I kind of felt for Martin and Donald because it was obviously it was basically their jobs. So, two of them were basically then out of jobs, which was obviously was not good for them.
Yeah. Yeah, so not to dwell too much on Craig White and his regime. We'll get out of that after this question. But, that's the season 2011, 2012. We hope we're going for 55 at that particular point. And then through a series of on-field and obviously off-field things, the season spectacularly comes crashing down around about us. And with the administration event, obviously Valentine's Day in 2012, and then the subsequent things that happened in terms of the liquidation and things like that. How did you first hear, about the administration part, and because Dave's still on the board at this point, you're in contact, I imagine. Like, how did you first hear about it, and how do you remember how you felt at the time? Was it give validation for your concerns, or was there trepidation about the implications?
Yeah, well, as you say, I mean, Dave was still on the board, and was still, he still had a big investment in the club. Obviously, his 20 million was still invested, his original investment, and so I was still in contact with him, and of course, remember that what also happened was that I discovered what had actually happened with the funding of the club. So I was the guy who, at the end of January, so basically 2 weeks before administration, discovered about the Ticketer's season ticket sale. So when I found that out, it became clear, unfortunately. So it wasn't a surprise the club was going into administration, because it basically forward sold its season tickets. So there was no more revenue to come in. So it was unfortunate, it was inevitable that was going to happen. As to how I felt, obviously, I mean, I suppose when you know it's coming, it's even worse to a certain extent. I was actually on holiday when the news came through, and you just felt a real kind of, it was kind of almost a sort of surreal feeling in some way. I suppose that you always felt that it'd be okay. You kind of because of the size of the club, you kind of felt it'd be okay. But it was a horrible time, obviously, and. Remember after that, it was all the stuff, the fans. I mean, I think the first home game after the administration was probably the biggest crowd of the season, wasn't it? It was like a 51,000 against Kilmarnock or something. It was a massive crowd. So you kind of felt, maybe it was naive, but you kind of felt it would be okay, but it was a horrible time for everyone at the club.
Yeah, absolutely. Fast forward from at least a public perspective anyway, in 2013, a couple of years after you see how the club is essentially being mismanaged, you're involved in leading a group of Rangers shareholders that requisitioned an EGM to vote on the removal of the PLC board of directors, which included then Chief Executive Craig Mather. On this occasion, that didn't prove successful. Did you expect it to be successful on that time, or was it more of a let's test the incumbents' resolve, let's get ourselves educated and learned in the process, and if we don't win this time, we'll be better prepared for coming back for future attempts to get the club back to where we need it to be?
Well, I think there's quite a lot of different questions you asked at different points. I suppose the starting point was that all of us had real concerns about what was going on inside the club, and there was just a very high level of unease and concern with all of those things. So we felt we had to do something, and there was also quite a lot of shareholders who were also concerned about the situation as well. So it wasn't just a sort of flying a kite and see what happens. It was based on real concern. Obviously, you can never tell with these things, and it's obviously not normal. Rangers became normal for doing these things in a strange kind of way, but it's not normal to requisition a general meeting and trying to move the whole board. That's something that doesn't happen unless there's real issues, and especially in football clubs. So we didn't know how it would go. We certainly didn't do it. We didn't do it as I say. In a kind of half-hearted way. We did hope to win, and we had a very big chunk of shareholders who were, I would say, probably 35%, who were really wanting change of some description. You might remember that when that process started, I think, in the August of 2013, and it came to a conclusion just before Christmas in December too. So it lasted about 5 months. It was quite a kind of roller coaster in the way things went in that particular process. And in fact, actually, Craig Mather was actually had to resign off the board before the requisition, because I went to the Court of Session in Edinburgh, and as a result of that, he actually resigned, so he kind of went before the actual general meeting. I think the thing that that swayed it for the incumbent board was actually the appointment of Graham Wallace, and Graham Wallace was actually a decent guy. I actually liked Graham, and I think he was just in the wrong movie. I think he just got into something he just didn't really know when he stepped into that job at that time, what was going on and what the environment was. But I think he was a decent guy, Graham Wallace, and I certainly respected him. I thought he was quite a good guy. So I think when he was appointed, he was obviously a credible guy. He was professional, he was experienced. So I think that kind of swayed, and obviously he was appointed by the incumbent board. I think that swayed a lot of the shareholders to basically stick with the board. So, we did affect change. We affected change with removing certain directors, and we got, a proper CEO on board. Obviously, he eventually left, but I think it was a worthwhile exercise, and we certainly did try and win it, and we didn't go into it in a kind of half-hearted way. But unfortunately, as I say, I think that appointment of Graham was quite a pivotal moment in the process.
Yeah, I did through my role with NARSA. I did get to meet both Craig and Graham, Craig Mather and Graham Wallace in 2013, 2014 at the San Francisco convention in 2013, and then Toronto in 2014. And just exactly as you say, in terms of Graham, there was a level of authority, experience, composure that I found with Graham that I didn't find so much with Craig. And not to knock the guy, my interactions with him were fleeting. He's on holiday, he's all excited, he thinks this is incredible. He just came across as really not understanding what the club is and what his role would be, and very starstruck, honestly, over Ali McCoist, because Ali McCoist was there as well, and he just kind of followed Ali around. But again, my limited vantage point at that particular time. But yeah, there's obviously, I could see why people might be swayed by that, and when it gets to that point. So then moving on from that unsuccessful attempt, in March 2015, you play a focal role in Dave King's consortium boardroom takeover, also taking on the role of interim chairman for Dave as the Scottish Football Authorities go through their approval process to ensure that he's a proper and fit person, and or what the terminology was at the time. Specifically, what was your role within Dave's consortium, that led to the successful outcome that we have all enjoyed since then?
Yeah, so there was actually a number of different sort of groups of people, and it was a real team effort, actually. So in terms of the so-called requisitioners, the three people who put their names forward to join the board, that was obviously myself, Dave, and John Gilligan. But obviously equally as important were the so-called three bears, George Lethem, George Taylor, and Douglas Park. So they were, obviously buying shares in the market. They bought shares, so we're able to get a shareholding where we had a decent chance of obviously being successful. So my job was really just to work with Dave and John to, I suppose, do two things. One was to persuade the investors, and remember, we'd met quite a lot of the investors the previous time. So one of the benefits of the 2013 exercise, we'd made some relationships which still actually were in place, and we were able to go back and say, look, nothing's really changed, let's try and change things. So I suppose, one role was to help Dave and work with Dave on those relationships, and obviously try to convince people to vote with us. When we were actually successful, obviously my role then, because Dave was based in South Africa, he wasn't on the board at the time, and it quickly led to, oh my God, this is a full-time job. So, so I hadn't been there for 4 years, and I walked through the door of a Gale House, and the only person who I recognised is Andrew Dixon. Everyone else is gone, any seniority as such, and myself and John Gilligan are then running the club. And we've also got day jobs as well. So it's like, this is just 24/7, So those 4 months, those 4 first months from March to the end of the season in June were just, it was just, absolute chaos and trying to stabilize things and obviously get a grip of what was happening at the club. So those were the main roles that I played. And obviously the fact that John and I were based in Glasgow, we could be the guys on the ground, if you like.
Yeah. It was definitely an exciting time. So kind of in terms of steadying the ship, we, as we talked about a wee while ago, the AGM that confirmed the consortium was successful March the 6th, 2015. And then you shared with me as we were chatting there last week about your first formal game that you attended immediately after the success of the AGM. Can you take me through that again? I thought it was really funny. In hindsight, it's really
no. It was a great. I'll never forget this actually, because it was a great. And John Gilligan and I talked about this a lot. In fact, Dave as well. So we were successful on Friday the 6th of March, 2015. That was the general meeting date. And as you can imagine, we can talk more about that in a minute. But that was amazing feeling, adrenaline, etc. Incredible. And it's obviously on every news channel in the world almost, and big news. And then we all go home, and then the following day, we're playing a championship game at Central Park, Cowdenbeath. So that's the 7th of March. And the previous Saturday, Hearts had beaten Cowdenbeath 10-0. And the other little kind of twist in terms of the cast of people, Cowdenbeath were managed by Jimmy Nicholl at the time. So Jimmy obviously became a great Rangers stalwart and obviously became assistant manager to Graham Murphy later on. So Jimmy is the manager of Cowdenbeath. So first of all, I hadn't been in Cowdenbeath for donkeys. I'd been there years and years ago. And Cowdenbeath Central Park is basically, it's on a kind of hill. So you've got to climb up through Cowdenbeath, up to this hill, 7th of March in Scotland, absolutely freezing. It's like a kind of bowl of a stadium, a rickety old stand, and then just a kind of bowl. And the wind is blowing across this pitch, and there's crisp packets blowing across, Mars bar, wrappers, etc. And then we draw nothing each for Cowdenbeath. It's just absolutely diabolical. And I turned to John Gilligan and said, "What have we done here? This is a real challenge." And then the bit that was amazing. So remember also the other Rangers connection is that Cowdenbeath's chairman is Donald Finlay. So Donald took great delight in pulling her legs out there, but obviously getting a point against the mighty Glasgow Rangers. And then we're sitting in the boardroom after the game and drawing nothing each and poring over the game, really poor game. And Donald says, "Right, sorry guys, it's now 5:30. You'll have to leave the car park because the stock cars are arriving to do stock car racing around Central Park. So we have to then run to the car park, get in our cars as these massive stock cars come past us with big wheels." And they're thinking, "What have we done here? This is Glasgow Rangers, we were in a UEFA Cup final, 10 minutes ago, and are now playing, in among stock cars in Cowdenbeath."
Wow, surreal. It must have been absolutely surreal. So in business from an administration perspective, many new administrations are measured on their first 100 days in office. And is that the way that you and Dave and John and team approached the first steps in terms of, right, let's do an inventory, let's just figure out exactly what it is we're dealing with? Because I'm assuming only so much would be able to be known prior to being able to wrestle control.
Yeah. So I think the issues we had were, so first of all, as I said, there was a lack of executive support. So really, Andrew Dixon was the only guy that was there from my time there, and Andrew's been there a long time. So at least we had the benefit of him being there, and obviously he had, a lot of continuity and knew, a lot of things that had gone on. So Andrew was there. So very quickly, actually within the first week, John and I were, so I guess there were 3 priorities. One was to, get to grips with what was actually going on, just try and get information to find out what was actually happening. And then, obviously pretty quickly, the key objective was then to try and stabilize the business side of the club so we could actually get a handle on what the funding issues were, etc. And then obviously the last priority, which is probably the most important priority for the fans, is obviously to try and get promotion to the Premier League. And at that point, you might remember the team is in free fall, and and were really in real danger. And as it turned out, we had to go through the playoffs. So those are probably the priorities. And so what I did actually, so on the Monday after the Cowdenbeath game, we unfortunately parted company with Kenny McDowell. Kenny had been through the mire in terms of the whole thing and just had to step down. And we got Stuart McCall in a part-time basis on the Tuesday. This was like 3 or 4 days after the general meeting. So Kenny Black and Stuart come in to try and get things moving, the football side of things. And just before we appointed Stuart, I phoned Stuart Robertson. So I've known Stuart for 30 years through business. I phoned Stuart to get a reference from Stuart McCall, because Stuart had been at Motherwell and obviously knew Stuart. So Stuart Robertson gives me the reference of Stuart McCall. I put the phone down. The phone goes a minute later from Stuart Robertson saying, "Look, if you guys looking for some help, I'm actually at a point where I'm, a bit of a career point, and I'd be interested in joining you." So Stuart, he said, "When can I start?" I said, "Tomorrow." So he literally turned up the following day and was a great help in those obviously early weeks, just helping us get on top of what's happening. So having Stuart there as well was a great help, and then obviously it was the right decision to appoint Stuart as the MD a bit later. So we're just trying to build up some support to try and deal with the issues we had, and try and. There was obviously a lot of firefighting and a lot of, prioritizing things, and obviously there's a limited resource. So it was a difficult 4 months, really difficult 4 months.
I'll bet. And in terms of any planning or strategies that were put in place, our unsuccessful attempt to navigate the playoffs and the playoff final defeat by Motherwell, did that materially impact any business decisions that had been made to date? Was there anything that had to be, hugely altered in terms of the strategy of where we had to go because we were having to endure another season in the Championship?
I don't think so. And I think with hindsight, it was probably it was actually, although we're all disappointed as football fans, I think if we're all being honest, we look at that situation, it was probably the right thing to regroup and rebuild again in the Championship. The club had come to that kind of crossroads. I mean, apart from anything else, maybe surprised to hear that almost the entire first team were out of contract the day of the Motherwell return leg. So we'd have to have brought in, kind of brand new squad. We obviously, Stuart McCall was amazing. I have so much respect for Stuart in terms of taking that position with no guarantees, short-term basis, just to help the club. He's a great guy, Stuart, and I felt sorry for him. We didn't get up, but I think we all felt it was a time for a fresh change and a fresh start. And I think the appointment of Mark Warburton was really refreshing, and it brought a new vibrancy to the club. And I think having that season in the Championship to kind of regroup and get new players in, kind of solidify the team in a less competitive and challenging division. I think with hindsight, that was actually disappointing as a football fan not to promotion. I think that was actually a bit of a blessing in some ways.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, as you say, maybe it doesn't feel like it at the time, but with the benefit of hindsight, it starts to maybe kind of give us a wee bit more breathing room. Yeah, that makes sense. So if I can switch attention to NARSA for a second. So you and I first met formally in June 2015 at the NARSA convention in Redondo Beach, California, hosted by Orange County Rangers Supporters Club. And as I mentioned briefly earlier, I had been involved in organising the 2013 in San Francisco, 2014 in Toronto convention, and met Craig and Graham, as I had mentioned before. When I met you, like, having followed with interest, like every Rangers fan all over the world, the struggles that we had been experiencing, I had a level of comfort, and I'm not blowing smoke just because we're chatting here, Paul, but I had a level of comfort that we were finally in the presence of a real Rangers fan with real genuine business experience and real Rangers boardroom experience as well, which I felt a calmness across the whole room especially when we got to your speech on the Saturday night. And like, what's your thoughts and memories of the convention? I think was that your first convention in a formal capacity representing the club?
Yeah, I'd been, well, I suppose I was on the Rangers Youth Development Board, and I'd been previously. So I'd been at 2 previous conventions. I went to Las Vegas in 2005 and I went to Naples in 2007. And then
Right.
obviously I hadn't been there for 8 years. And I suppose I was in a kind of semi-official capacity as a Rangers, youth development director, if you like, not a main board director previously. I think my memories of that was, obviously it was only 2 or 3 months since we had we'd taken control. It was also the week after the Motherwell playoffs, so there was obviously a bit of a flatness. And I think my initial, having been at previous conventions when the team was obviously doing really well, and 2005 was after Helicopter Sunday, so it was absolutely chaos and excitement. And then I was in this environment where, to be honest with you, Gary, it was quite a flat kind of environment, and I think maybe it was. I think the people who went to the convention were almost just kind of not fed up with the whole thing, but just kind of, it'd been such a kind of attritional number of years. Everyone was just kind of at the point of tired, and here comes this new guy again. And so I kind of felt, I was certainly warmly welcomed, but I was quite nervous. I was nervous about speaking, and I had to think a lot in the speech, and I didn't quite know what to say, because what can you say after all the years that have been. So it was actually, it was a great time, but it was actually quite, for me, quite nerve-wracking as well. And I remember what I tried to do. I remember I was sitting in my room, because obviously, it was in Los Angeles, so there was the time difference, and of course, you can't sleep properly because of the time difference. And so I was waking up at odd times and all this kind of stuff. I remember trying to think, what will I actually say here to try and give some sense to people, and obviously, of course, there's a lot of people come from the UK as well to NARSA, so they're interested, and there's obviously quite a lot of media interest as well. And what I decided to do was try and break it into the past, the present, and the future. And I talked a little bit about the past and my involvement in the club, some of the standards the club we've had, successes we've had, with tough times as well, obviously. Then I brought it up to the sort of current day and where we were right now, and I tried to give a kind of honest assessment of where we were, the challenges, and then I talked a little bit about the vision for the future, and trying to return Rangers to the levels we've been at before, and what would be needed to get to that point. So I think that's what I try to do from memory, and but I was quite nervous. I mean, it was quite a nerve, and I've done a lot of public speaking, but I was quite nervous. But I think I'd like to think people thought I was genuine, and I was trying to present the situation in the best possible way. I wasn't trying to sugarcoat anything or try to present things that were unrealistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recall the speech very well, and one of the things I remember chatting to you directly about at that point, and it's funny you kind of mentioned, just a new face. It was a new face, but not sort of thing. So it wasn't like an absolute net new face in terms of someone we'd never heard of before. And I remember saying at the time, the main thing I'm asking for right now is please just come back to Vancouver in 2016, so that we have the thing we haven't enjoyed for a period of time, which is, continuity. And come back and say, I said this last year and this is where we're at. So to that point, you did attend Vancouver in 2016, 2017. We were able to report on, Stuart was doing the conversation, or sorry, the chat in 2016, or the speech, sorry, in 2016, Las Vegas 2017, Dave did the speech there. We were feeling, that they were definitely making progress, but from a fan perspective, the progress wasn't truly manifesting a genuine challenge on the pitch. From a club perspective, just in terms of NARSA, because we've been very well supported during my tenure with NARSA, which stretches back to 2012. Like, how does the leadership in the club perceive attendance at the NARSA convention, support for NARSA events overall? Is it something that's nice to do? It's a stakeholder engagement endeavour, and we'll just do that and make sure that we're engaging with a global fan base, or is there something more deep rooted to that? And before you answer, the reason I ask is that I've often had a feeling that we haven't truly managed to take advantage of the time that we're together. at the NARSA conventions, because it's essentially a year-end party, and we get together and we have, there's some formality to it, but not in terms of conducting business, truly conducting business or anything like that. What's the perceptions, or what were the perceptions in those days of the NARSA convention and Rangers representation?
Yeah, well, I think very positive. I think the leadership were always keen to come. Certainly when I first started going to back in the mid noughties, obviously I think from memory we could have first team players there, and in many cases the manager. So in 2005, Alec McLeish was there. In 2007, Walter was there, and unfortunately with the Champions League qualifying dates and all that kind of stuff, it just made it really difficult to get players to come. So I think that was something that I think did detract a little bit from the kind of grandeur of the whole thing, not having maybe some of the first team stars and the manager, etc. But no, I think it was always a very positive view, and obviously you and I spoke at length at all the conventions and the meetings with Dave King and some of your colleagues, and I think I used to always say to you that I also wanted there to be more of a kind of business discussion and a kind of a way of trying to help the club effectively tap into what is probably the biggest sports market in the world, and I don't think we really achieved that, if I'm honest. I think we it's difficult because it was basically a party, and it's 4 days and it's hard to, and everyone wants to enjoy themselves obviously, so it's kind of hard to have formal business meetings and all that sort of stuff, but it was I think we could maybe have done more than that, I think would be my assessment. But one of the things that I think we did find useful was it's always good to, I think when I even find it now living in Portugal, when you're away from home, you've got a different perspective of home than you do when you're actually in home. So obviously this year has been completely different because of COVID-19, but in let's call it a normal year, you guys in America and Canada have got a different perspective on things, and I think getting that perspective is quite useful because it's a different perspective. It's independent and it's objective, and I think it's quite a useful thing to do. And as I say, so I think there's a lot of respect for what you guys were doing, a keenness to support what you were doing, and I would agree with you. I think the one thing I would say, I think all of us, we could maybe have done more on the business side, and it wasn't to kind of want to try necessarily, just circumstances. One thing you probably don't realise is that I don't know if I've ever told you this, but in my first convention in 2015, you might remember a guy called Robert Sarver. So Robert Sarver was potentially interested in the club at one point. He was a wealthy San Diego guy. So I actually sneaked Robert Sarver into the convention.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he came to it for a day and just observing. Just come and see this, and you'll see it. You'll get a sense. He goes, I don't believe that 1,000 guys are going to turn up for Rangers in America. So come and see this. And he came and he couldn't believe it. He said, "This is incredible." He lived in San Diego, so it wasn't too far away to come to Los Angeles, and he was bowled over. He said, "This is incredible. It's these guys are so passionate and so So that's a bit of interesting feedback from a pretty savvy American sports guy.
Yeah, that's tremendous. Thanks for sharing that. I hadn't ever heard that before. I'm going to ask you about your highlights of NARSA, just in terms of overall experiences in a second here. But one of my personal highlights was from 2017 in Las Vegas. We had just finished the Q&A on the Saturday after the annual general meeting. It's kind of getting a wee bit sparse. There's, Dave and Alistair are hanging out and getting some photographs, and there's some autographs and stuff like that. And I remembered you were there as well. And then it seemed to be the room was empty. And then Dave and Alistair walked out of a door. And as they were going through one of the big doors in the room, Dave puts his kind of arm around Alistair as if, I've got something I want to talk to you about here. And then off they went. And I thought, I wonder what that was. And then I know Alistair relatively well, certainly from a comfort of being able to talk to him perspective. And I had said to him afterwards, look, what was the conversation about? He says, well, Dave's actually asked me to rejoin the board. and no one knows this, so keep it on the down low. And I have to admit, I was like a kid at Christmas. I was so excited because NARSA, that opportunity might not have been there had they not had a chance to be in each other's company, in something that was dedicated to Rangers and stuff. So I felt a bit of pride and quite a lot of emotion about us being able to facilitate that conversation live in person. It was great. Anyway, enough about that. So what's your main highlight or memory from all of the conventions that you've attended? If you had to pick one main highlight, whether it's things you've observed, things you've experienced yourself, or anything like that.
Well, maybe if I can just take advantage of our friendship to maybe mention two as opposed to one. But so I think I've got two memories that spring to mind. So the first one was my first convention. So obviously I didn't know what to expect. Las Vegas, I'd been there a couple of times before and various trips, but I didn't know what to expect, obviously, for a Rangers convention. And obviously that historically, and I think even going forward, is always the biggest convention in terms of numbers of people. So 1,000 people or 1,200 people, something like that. I just didn't know what to expect. And and of course, it started on the Wednesday or the Thursday just after Helicopter Sunday. And from memory, so on the flight across to Las Vegas, Alec McLeish, Maurice Ross, I think. There was Bob Malcolm. I can't remember the exact people. It was Maurice Ross certainly, but big Alec McLeish was on the flight, and obviously made a good laugh with him. And then the next surreal thing was we get to the airport in Las Vegas to get a taxi to the hotel, and it's 9 o'clock in the evening. And we're in this queue, and suddenly there's nobody there apart from us, and there's no taxis. And suddenly we look around, and there's Michael Moles, Arthur Newman, and there may even been Giovanni Van Bronckhorst. We're like, "Oh, guys, are you guys here for the convention?" They go, "What convention?" The Rangers convention. So they'd gone independently to Las Vegas, staying in the Bellagio at the same time as the Rangers convention. You see them going, "Oh my God, what have we done here? We've come to Las Vegas at the same time as." So they had no idea this was on, and then they were hearing some golfing trip or something. So I think they got roped in by Maurice Ross and Alec into various things thereafter. But that was interesting. But then my main highlight of that actual convention was, you might remember when obviously we were all so excited after Helicopter Sunday, and I can't remember who the MC was, but I even now feel the hairs on the back of my neck. So he says, in front of 1,200 people, and here is Alec McLeish with the league championship. And he just walks into the room, and the place just goes absolutely, crazy. So it was that was an amazing experience to be in that. I think Goffey was there as well, but to see Alec walk in with the league championship, obviously just after Helicopter Sunday, and then of course you guys do your Q&A on a Saturday morning, and Alec was grown men crying, "Alec, you're my hero," and all that stuff. And then of course 6 months later they're basically shouting at him and all the rest of it. So it was an interesting time. But so yeah, I mean, great times, and they're just really really great events. And I suppose my only other experience was again when I first came as chairman and interim chairman in 2015. We were just in the process of appointing Mark Warburton. So a lot of the time when I was in Los Angeles, I was on the phone trying to get the Mark Warburton deal over the line. So there was a lot of time on the phone in that particular convention.
Nice bit of business. I remember trying to get by hook or by crook the information from you as to who our next manager was going to be, and you never relented. I was very disappointed, and then you would just eventually say, "Who do you think it should be?" And I'm like, "No, come on, man, please just tell me. I couldn't possibly do that." Okay. So I'm assuming, and I hate to assume, but I'm assuming that we will see you back at an NARSA convention at some point in the future when things normalise in the world.
Obviously, if invited, Gary, I need to get an invite, but I would certainly love to come back when things are normalised, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So just to switch back to Rangers, you resigned from the board just over 3 years after the takeover in May 2018. What prompted the resignation? And reflecting on that event now, some 3 or almost 3 years later. Are you happy with your decision?
Yeah, it was nothing mysterious. I mean, I just was burned out. Basically, I just, off and on, I'd been on the board for 7 years. In the 3 years, the second time was really tough. For quite a lot of it. I remember Celtic were, they're basically our benchmark. Were obviously dominant and playing really well. We were trying to rebuild the club at the same time as getting things right on the pitch. So it was a really tough time, and I think what one of the things that you kind of experience as a Rangers director and fan is that you really kind of, it's very hard to make it purely objective and business like. You've obviously got the emotion of the whole thing, so I think you do feel the kind of lows a lot more. That the lows are really quite difficult. You kind of feel responsible, and you feel a kind of higher level of disappointment. So that was a tough time. Obviously, some pretty crushing defeats and tough times, and I just kind of felt burned out, and I just felt it was time to go. I'd done my stint. I kind of felt confident that we got the club back in the right hands. I mean, any set of human beings, the board will make mistakes. Obviously, they're just human beings, but the big difference was that everyone there to a man was a Rangers supporter and had the best interest of the club at heart. So all the decisions were being made for the right reasons. So I kind of felt good about that, and I just felt burned out. So I don't regret the decision. I'm delighted with what's happened since I left, and it's been great to watch the progress getting made. Both on and off the pitch.
Yeah. Do you ever see yourself having a formal, active role again with the club at any point in the future?
I don't think so. I mean, you never say never. I didn't necessarily think I'd get back on the board when I left the board the first time, but I don't think so. I think who knows? But I think that there are younger people and different people, fresh blood coming through who'll have different ideas, and so yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. But as you say, never say never as such.
So what are you up to now? We had the pleasure of being in each other's company. Or I had the pleasure of being in your company, I should say. I guess that would be almost a couple of years ago now, when I was back home visiting my dad. And are you still in some way informally involved with anything that's going on, or is it just from a fan perspective? You show up, you're obviously still held in esteem within the club, but there's nothing formal to that.
No, there's nothing formal, and I still talk to a lot of the guys. I kind of know a lot of the guys obviously very well. So talk to Dave occasionally. I speak to John Gilligan quite frequently. John Bennett I know very well. Graham Park, Stuart, Andrew, etc. So I keep in touch with what's going on. I try not to obviously interfere, because it's not my business now to be involved. But I'm very supportive of what they're doing. They've done a great job in very trying circumstances, and I think we're now reaping the benefits of that hard work. And it's been a tough shift, over the last 5 or 6 years, but they've stuck at it, and I had a small part to play in that as well, which is comfort, which is something I feel proud about. But I think the board have done a great job, and so I keep in touch with those guys, but I'm not involved in any formal capacity.
Okay, great stuff. Okay, so what I do on these interviews as well, Paul, is I do a quick fire round, and it's just random questions that I think are going to have a wee bit of fun. Say the first thing that comes into your mind, the first polite thing that comes into your mind. What's the first career that you remember ever dreaming of having when you were a kid?
Sports journalist.
Sports journalist. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Not to be a sports journalist.
Okay. What's your favourite song right now?
Right now?
It doesn't need to be a song of right now, but just the one that you would, because some people are like, oh, it depends if it was when I was a kid or when I was, courting my wife or whatever it is. Like, the very first song that comes to your mind, your favourite song.
I think that's really tough. I mean, because I think we're all kind of having a bit of a nostalgia thing at the moment with lockdown and all that. So I think that's quite a difficult question to answer. I'm listening to quite a lot. I'm listening to quite a lot of Supertramp. Even though it's a Supertramp, I was never particularly, never a massive fan of. But I'm listening to quite a lot of their stuff at the moment.
Right, nice one. I think you answered this earlier, but I'll ask again just in case. Favourite ever Rangers player?
Well, I think in terms of the complete package, John Greig, in terms of everything that goes, if you had to describe a kind of complete Ranger, it would be John Greig for all the qualities he's got. And one of my biggest kind of delights, if you like, from the whole thing, being involved in Rangers was meeting John and spending time with him. And then when I was on the board the second time, sitting beside him every second Saturday and just listening to a guy with him talk about football was an amazing feeling. So he is my complete Ranger. Obviously, in terms of best player, in terms of skill, I'm sure John wouldn't be too offended if I said he wasn't the most skillful player in the club's history. It's a tough one. I think it'd be between Davy Cooper, Brian Laudrup, and Paul Gascoigne.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to choose one of those, I would probably choose Laudrup.
Excellent. What was the last film you watched?
That's a good question. I think I watched the Founder, about the story of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Which was okay. Wasn't great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice. Great. Okay. So to wrap up, I know when we were preparing for this interview, you had sworn me off of any talk of football, and we're not going to talk about 55 until it's mathematically over the line and that. As we talk today, we are 7 points away from clinching 55, 7 points from a possible 24, I think it is. And, I firmly believe it's coming home, and obviously respecting your stance on that, we're not going to get into that. But assuming eventually that it comes home and reflecting, I know that you just mentioned it briefly there just a few minutes back, your role in getting 55, that 10-year hiatus that we've had in terms of championship success, how do you reflect upon that? And this is, be as honest as don't be completely bashful about it. How do you feel about the role that you played in that in terms of the overall contribution to the 55?
I think obviously I feel proud that I was involved in I guess helping to, I'm going to use the word rescue the club, because I think it was a rescue of the club. And obviously I feel proud that I was involved in that. I was only one of several people who were there as well. And so I'd like to think that people would recognise that I had a role, a positive role and an important role in doing that. So yeah, I think I feel a sense of pride in doing that. It was something that was really difficult in the sense that it was, had a lot of time required for it. It was a lot of low points in that process, and it wasn't an easy journey. It was from 2000. It was 4 years, but to me it was very important. To me it was something that we just had to do. I really felt it was something that was critical, and I think if we hadn't done it, I'd been very worried about the consequences. So yeah, I feel a sense of pride, and I feel a sense of happiness at where we are now. I feel as if, as I say, I think the current board have really taken things on massively in the last 2 or 3 years. I feel great for them as well. I think they really deserve a lot of praise, and I think they're now reaping the benefits of the hard work they put in.
Yeah, absolutely. If when 55 comes, I hope that you do take a time to have a very big tipple of whatever your tipple of choice is these days, because you absolutely deserve it. One last quick question. Based on your entire Rangers journey, what do you believe is the biggest lesson that you've learned through your whole Rangers journey?
I think when you meet people like John Greig and some of the kind of, let's call it, the kind of stalwarts and the foundations of the club, you they talk about a number of things, but a lot of them talk about it being a special club, and they talk about the club getting underneath the skin of people, and you see that even with players that I'm kind of been quite privileged to meet a lot of my heroes and spend time with my heroes, so I actually know a lot of these guys now, and it's amazing the number of guys who kind of foreign players who were only at Rangers for a short period of time, but are still real Rangers fanatics. It's quite incredible that the fact that the club's had that impact on them, and so when you hear all this stuff, you think, oh, that sounds a bit twee and a bit kind of, is that right? But actually, when you get involved in the club, you're kind of in the inner sanctum, and it's not perfect. Obviously, there's no institution perfect, but you see how special it is. It's a really special institution, and I think that's what it is. It's a real institution, and it's been really, obviously through the mire a lot in the last 10 years. And every institution's got ups and downs. It's all. I remember, Dave saying that. I think somebody, I think Sandy Jardine actually at one point asked him, would we take down the pictures of Craig White and other people in the board? And I said, well, just keep them up there because it's all part of our history. Good or bad, you have to remember the bad times to savor the good times and vice versa. So, so everything's got ups and downs. And that's why you really then enjoy the good times if you get through the bad times. So I think you hear all this stuff, you kind of wonder whether it's true, but when you get involved in the club, as I have been, in say the last 10, 15 years, it really does get underneath your skin. It's a really special club. And I think my main lesson is that, it's just to kind of understand that all of us, no matter what position you're in at the club, whether the manager or the players or the chairman or the ground staff or whoever you are, you're basically a custodian of the club. You're passing the club on to the next generation. And actually, I heard John Gilligan's interview recently. He was talking about, in some ways forget 55 and forget, 9 in a row and 10 in a row and all these sort of things that are obviously really important. What is really important is that there's going to be a generation of people, kids, who for the first time are going to see a successful Rangers in 10 years. My youngest son is 16. So he didn't really know it. All he knew in his early days was success, and then suddenly no success for 10 years. So it's great to think that we can then pass the baton on to these young guys and actually can see, hopefully, some sustained success. So I think, remember, all of us, we're just custodians. We're just passing through time, and you've got to try and preserve the club and pass it on in the best way you can to the next generation so they can pick it up with their kids. And so we're going, and then in another 150 years, we're having this conversation with different people. That's what I think is really important. And I think, if I've learned nothing from the last 10 years, it's been a really, really tough 10 years. That to me is the biggest lesson.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. I love it. Paul, thank you very, very much for joining us today. I always enjoy our chats and hope that it's not going to be too long before we get to chat again. And we are toasting 55. Take care. All the very best, my friend.
No problem. Nice to see you there. Cheers. Good night.